Evening, mate. You all right?
Yes, not so bad at all. I'm still, after Ramsey, but
Yes. That was one hell of an experience. Yes.
it was, and it was
Yeah.
it works so great as a dynamic that he will be back. But we're hoping to get some more guests in as well. We've got another one next week.
Yep.
Yeah, but we'll
Which
talk
looking
more
forward
about
to.
that at the end because
Yes.
she's brilliant. She's an amazingly talented writer. She's incredibly knowledgeable about all things Gothic. It's Violet Fenn, and so we'll talk about more what she's going to be doing next week with us.
So yeah, hit like buttons, hit subscribe buttons, hit any buttons, please. Yeah. Bells,
bell end.
whistles. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bell. Yeah. Bell end's good. Yeah. I've been trying to avoid that gag, but yeah, I'm glad that we. Yeah.
No, I figured out last week. Life's too short to kind of miss opportunities like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think yeah. I think you're absolutely right.
Get them out the way. Get them out the way.
We were looking at The Judge's House by Bram Stoker.
Yes.
Right.
So tell us, Ash, what's the synopsis?
Synopsis is right. Where the hell have I put it? Synopsis. Right. So we start off with a young scholar called, of all the unfortunate fucking names in the world, Malcolm Malcolmson, who wants some time to get his studies done. So he finds an isolated house in the middle of nowhere, rents it. He's studying for his final maths exam. The house, he learns that it was once owned by an impulsive hanging judge, and the house is believed to be haunted. His sceptical indifference worries the local doctor, who believes the isolation is wearing on Malcolmson's sanity. Pleads with him to alert him at once if the scholar needs assistance by ringing the house's ancient bell, because the house comes equipped with a bell, as heavy-handed plot devices often do.
Yes.
So he's disturbed by many rats that he hears in the walls, and one of them keeps making itself known, sitting there. He tries to get rid of it by throwing books at it, but the only book that will actually get rid of this large, enormous, ugly rat is the Bible when it's thrown at it. Tension mounts, his isolation increases. He suddenly realizes that the portrait of the judge has been vacated. There's only bare, dry canvases left where the figure once stood, and in a moment of horror, he sees the leering, lusty-eyed judge eyeing him from the comfort of an easy chair. The rats on the floor start jumping for the bell rope, fashioned from the judge's old noose. They're trying to sound the alarm, but the judge quickly cuts the rope and fashions a noose out of the slack. Overwhelmed by horror and awe, the converted skeptic initially tries to run, but his will is overwhelmed by that of his powerful captive, who ties the noose back to the bell pull, fixes it around his victim's throat, and launches him into death. And sent running by the sound of the tolling bell, the villagers find Malcolm's corpse bobbing from the noose, whilst the judge's portrait watches on, his face twisted in a sneer. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
So what did you think to it?
Well, I was trying to think of the best way of describing my emotions and feelings towards this one, and I think the best one I could come up with was I fucking loved it.
Yeah, I've got a couple of issues with it.
Well, we'll come to the issues in a second, because I want to go on about loving it for a second, because I understand, because last week Ramsey, when you said you were going to make us read this one, Ramsey said, because we're on first name terms, obviously, Ramsey said it had haunted his nightmares since being a child, and I totally understand why, because it's horrific. It's utterly horrific. It bounces along merrily. It has almost comedic style horror going on that just makes you smile in what it's doing, and it knows exactly where it is. It's not trying to be anything clever at all. It just puts in a nice twisty kind of turny story, in that you think you know what's going on, and everybody else thinks they know what's going on, and then you suddenly realize what is actually happening, and it just becomes horrific. So for all the faults that are within the story itself, I can forgive it huge amounts because I just found the thing just so bloody entertaining.
I think one of the most horrific things about it is one of the things I would consider to be a fault, really, in the fact that the hero doesn't deserve that ending.
No, and
we've read so many horror stories where people do deserve it. You sort of like read a story and you think, yeah, that's an evil fucker. Kill them. Yeah, kill them in a horrible way, mutilate them, let them live through Brexit and a Tory government. That sort of monstrosity is needed for them. But for this guy, all he's doing is studying, and he's studying quite diligently. You know, he's sort of like, he's not even on anything stronger than strong tea. Which of
very
all
strong
the...
tea. I mean, I'd like to know what tea he's drinking that the doctor tells him to stop drinking it.
Yeah. PG tips? Fuck it, no, calm it down. Yeah, back on the chamomile, you. So yeah, you've got somebody who's a student who's studying hard, who's sort of like dedicated to improving his knowledge, and that seems to be his only crime. And from what I've read in theories and people criticising it, it's meant to be the sin of reason for the sake of reason and pursuing knowledge and pursuing logic. But
I'm going to call Occam's razor on this one. Absolutely, right? I don't think it has any symbolism whatsoever. I think the victim makes the judge more evil because there is no moralistic standpoint. The judge has been hanging people all over the place. You know, he's a well-hung judge. Get it out of the way, that's what I'll say.
It won't be the last time we do that gag tonight.
I'm sure it won't be. But but it was to show how insincere the judge is with all his callings. He would hang anyone. It didn't matter. The judge is the evil one. The judge is the one that is actually needs to be seen as being this evil. So he attacks someone that has no reason to be attacked. If he had done something wrong, then you might be sitting there going, well, justice is served. You know, I mean, we know this with, in particular, modern horror, and in particular the slasher genre, where they actually have really moralistic tales behind them. You know, it's anyone who has sex or takes drugs, they're the ones that are going to be killed. If you steal something, you're going to be killed. So there's that moralistic type sort of view going through it. Where I thought here it was about showing how amoral the judge was, you know, in everything. And that's where the evil and the horror comes from. And it made it, like you say, I don't see it as a criticism. I saw it as quite refreshing that you had a complete innocent for a change, an absolute innocent that was the victim here.
Yeah, I suppose that maybe that's what makes it all the more scary, the fact that somebody who is completely innocent. So that means that even somebody who's as innocent as me could one day be a victim in a horror story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seriously, when I was a child, I was terrified of being the nicest kid on the street, because every time a child got killed and you saw it on the news, everyone said he was such a lovely child and he was the nicest kid on the street. And in horror stories, it was always some bastard that gets killed. So that it never really married up. Well, this one was probably more realistic because of it, because nice people get killed, and you know, that's what this did. What was a shame is that everybody is going to think that he suicided himself, because, you know, it's because that's how they're going to find him, isn't he? They've already reported that they think he's going mad. He's drinking his tea. He's sending him over the edge.
Yeah. Well, damn those PG tips. Yeah. Right. My biggest bugbear with this one is, so I've got two, okay? And I'm going to get them out of the way. First of all, he's called Malcolm Malcolmson.
Yeah,
that's lazy
my
fucking
name.
right.
Have you seen my name?
Yes, I have. You're Ratty Ratface. Yeah.
I genuinely thought that about the name. It was almost like if it was written nowadays, it'd be called Malcolm Face.
Yeah, that to me was lazy writing, as though he sort of like put a placeholder in there, as though I'll call it Malcolm Malcolmson, and then forgot to change it by the time he sent it off to the publisher. And the other issue I'd got is when one of the characters, and I can't remember which one, I know it's one of the female characters, runs off incontinently.
Yeah, that's an odd description, was it? Do you know what? I quite liked it as a description, because I'd never heard it done that way before. and it made me laugh.
Yeah, I looked up the definition, and it can mean without restraint.
Yeah.
So yeah,
she ran off right, okay. Yeah. I didn't look up I just thought she wet herself and ran away. I thought it was another way of saying fear.
It's like last week when we were looking at Lovecraft with Rats in the Walls. He used the word. No, he used the word crapulously.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, it's just which is defined as roughly feeling the.
Actually, that was Robert Louis Stevenson. That was the Body Snatcher. And he described someone as looking crapulous.
Was it him?
Yeah.
But yeah, crapulous. Somebody who looks hungover. Just love it. Yeah. Or they suffer from alcohol. So yeah, those are my two main problems with it. And yeah, God, now that I'm sort of like picking holes in the thing. Why has he got a fucking big bell on his house?
Well, it never gets explained, does it? But it kind of gets half explained by the doctor, because he calls it the emergency bell. So I think...
Oh, right, yeah.
Because my mother has these in her flat, right? You know, they just happen to be in her flat. We haven't had them installed. And I've accidentally pulled the one in the toilet, because they've actually put a big thing that looks exactly like the light switch next to the light switch. So it's very easy to make it think that, you know, they panic and think my mum's had some sort of turn. But actually, it's just me trying to turn the light off. So I think it's one of those old ones, because his was the judge's house. So I think he had a certain amount of importance. So he did have a bell that would, you know, in order to call people to his house if he was in need of, you know, service or something.
I suppose that shows that there's this disparity between when it was written. It's one of those historical disparities that we've got no way of understanding fully, or I've got no way of understanding fully, why somebody would have something like that in there. It's like you mentioned earlier in the week about the charity that one of his...
Yes.
Yeah, was it the Greenhouse charity?
It's something like the Greenhouse charity, because it was in that book, wasn't it? With the it was the open... No, was it Open Door?
Might have been, yeah.
I think it was Open Door, and the woman wouldn't stay in the house with him because she couldn't, because she had to be back by 9 o'clock, otherwise she lost her room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just sort of like, it's these historical details that are included in the stories that make them obviously so rich and so of their time, but make it kind of difficult to drag them into the 21st century to read and fully enjoy.
Yes.
I mean, I still fully enjoyed it. I'm not saying that I didn't. I'm just saying...
They are things that kind of drop you out of the story, aren't they? Like I say, with Lovecraft's last week, with the Rats in the Walls, and because I'm from the southern regions of the UK, every time he was talking about the Aris, it made me giggle. And it's like when you read Sherlock Holmes and they ejaculate quite a lot. And
yes,
it is just like, and actually that when she ran off incontinently, I didn't even bother looking up the word because it actually seemed to make sense in my head. I had a connection between wetting self and running away. But they were just different times and the way that the people used the language, which is why Pigeons from Hell seemed really weird, because it didn't seem to have any of that type of stuff apart from the racial language. Which is why it felt more like someone in the modern era writing something old rather than, you know, being contemporary of that time. Because the way that they use the language is just incredible sometimes. It's one of the things that I've been enjoying about this. We've managed to read some fucking excellent stories. And they've been an awful lot of fun. So the bell in the house, I mean, I get it, and I've seen these houses that have got bells on them. It's just, why? And I get that he's a judge and he's somebody important, but he's a judge. He's the last person you would think, oh, well, he needs a bell on his house. I mean... remember, don't forget, this is also of a time not long after. Actually, I think around about this time as well, they used to do it, where they actually used to put bells on graves.
Right.
And they used to have a rope that went down into the coffin just in case people got buried alive, because they had such a fear of being buried alive. So people with wealth back then, you know, who had these importance, and people would wait on them hand and foot, even if they thought they were complete bastards, they would still wait on them hand and foot because they're like Lord of the Manor. And we're kind of, over centuries we've been brought up to have this house on the hill mentality about things. And if he's on his own, and by the sounds of it, everything was about that. He didn't have wife, he never had children, he was a judge on his own, he was becoming elderly. And maybe, there's another story there where the night that the bell rang and nobody went was the night he died. And that's why the judge just doesn't leave the house, and, because nobody attended to him when he needed it, even though they were ringing the bell. And that's why everybody in the whole area doesn't like that house as well, because it has those dark connotations. I mean, this is all stuff that I'm putting on top of it. None of that was in the story itself, but it kind of allured to other forces going on. And to me, only because I understand the bell historically, so I get where you come from. If you don't know the historical significance of what those bells were for, then it makes no sense, and you can't build that extra thing. I think they call it the schemata, don't they, when they're doing linguistic analysis, in that you need to have a certain amount of knowledge so that you don't have to have too much described. And so if you don't have that knowledge, then the description kind of falls away a little bit.
And to me it did look a little bit like when they're having the conversation and she says they remind him about the bell, and they talk about, oh, is it the house with the big bell on the roof? Yeah. Well, that's not foregrounding for what's going to come later, is it?
But there's also the other side of it. They might be using it as a euphemism. Oh, is that where the bell is? The house with the bell. They're just referring to what the judge used to be called.
One of my favourite parts in it was when he was talking to the woman who's the recipient of the greenhouse charity, where she says, bogies is anything but bogies, and then says rats is bogies and bogies is rats. And that's almost as though she's sort of like giving the plot away as well.
Yes.
Which, to give it away in such a bold fashion, is just such a confident piece of writing. She's
a great character.
Yeah, they all were. They were all so fully rounded. The one who doesn't want to be in the house, where she's sort of like saying, "Oh well, if you'll pardon me for saying it, and I apologise for saying it," and you'd sort of like got all her reticence, and then you'd got the forthrightness of this other one. I thought it was populated with solid, realistic, credible characters. And the horror is genuinely frightening, like you say. The whole notion that somebody who's innocent ends up being killed by this judge, and worst of all, well, first bad thing, the judge makes it look like a suicide, which people are going to think it's a suicide because he's been on a tea drinking binge.
He's teed up to the max.
And also the fact that the judge's portrait is smiling at the end of it, which as though,
remember that description of him smirking is just so brilliant, because you instantly know the look on his face.
One of the bits of criticism I was reading talks about how Stoker has this way of creating villains who are sensual and sexually attractive. And the judge is described as having a sensual mouth at one point.
Yes.
Which, the Sacha Baron Cohen Bruno? Yes. Is it like Bruno when he was describing one of these godbotherers as having blowjob lips?
I think it was one of these. And also, I think there might be a certain amount of its time, because describing men in handsome ways is very different now to when it was back then. I don't know. I mean, you've read my short story. I've written a story that's going in the new book about Bram Stoker, and part of that kind of is actually a little bit based on how sensual he makes his male characters, because he does do that a lot. Even I thought that even in the Dracula's Guest, the main protagonist was described in a rather alluring way for a
I was able to rub one out. So I thought.
And let's face it, Dracula, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, actually,
who wouldn't?
Exactly. I've probably done that sentence the wrong way round, to be perfectly honest with you. But yes, but it's the so he does do that, and but funny enough, I don't know, it's his style, isn't it? I wouldn't call that a criticism. I actually think he just likes bad boys.
Yeah. And no, it wasn't meant to sort of like a criticism. It was just an observation.
That's what other people have said, isn't it? Other people have criticised it for they criticise his what do you call bad protagonist? I want to call him protagonist because he's so intriguing to the story, but it's basically the bad guy, isn't it?
An antagonist.
And
antagonist.
Antagonist. Thank you very much.
Yes.
So the antagonists are always really you almost root for them in a way because they're so actually kind of handsome and alluring and so dangerous to know and interesting and like I think it's almost like ABBA wrote the song The Day Before You Came about these kind of characters.
Which ones are ABBA again?
The Day Before You Came from ABBA. They said I love it because it has so much cynicism about it because it never explains what actually happens after he arrived. Just how ordinary life was before he turned up. That's basically, or she, because it never actually says that either.
Right. So for inspiration on this one, again, one of the things that I've been looking at is sort of like saying that it's one of his strongest pieces of fiction alongside Dracula's Guest and Dracula. It's a frequent one that appears in horror anthologies as commonly as The Body Snatcher, The Monkey's Paw, The Signalman. And it mentions here The Red Room. Oh, we've looked at The Red Room, haven't we? Have we?
No, we haven't read The Red Room yet.
The Red Room and Man Size in Marble, which I've got no idea what the hell that is.
That sounds like a Gollum story to me. It
sounds like, sounds like something to do with tissues to me. I'm just thinking, I don't know. We'll have to look at that in a moment.
We're going to have to read that one because that sounds awesome. Yes, I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, right? Okay. A couple of things I loved about it. The rats themselves are a fantastic character in this.
Yeah.
In the H.P. Lovecraft, they were a nuisance noise that were kind of flabby pieces of running food, that were off around the place, mainly there to annoy the cat and to make you think that something else is going on that leads to them not being rats. In this one, they're ace. I mean, they really are. They're actually trying to help here. They're almost trying to be the heroes. And it reminded me of one point. Have you seen the MTV movie Mike's Apartment with the cockroaches?
No.
All right. It's brilliant. It's a guy who just lives in an apartment and it's like full of cockroaches, but he becomes friends with the cockroaches, so they start helping him out. And it was so much like that because he got used to the noise. And I love the way that they were just almost having a party. The description of them was really excitable. And he got used to the noise and he was working away with this going on in the background. And then they go silent because this other, bastard rat turns up. And I love the whole way that he used the noise of the rats to create that level of tension. It wasn't the fear in Malcolm that made you go, oh, it was the rats going quiet that made you go, oh, and I thought that was so clever.
Do you think it would be possible to do a colonialism reading of this?
Oh, could you? Yeah, I think so.
I mean, if you perceive Malcolmson invading this property, he demands to rent it. He goes in there uninvited, yeah? And if you look at it from that perspective, he is the villain of this piece. When the rat judge rat thing, which I'm anthropomorphizing the creature. Yeah, he sounds like he's from Judge Dredd's era, doesn't he?
He's from Mega City 1, yeah.
When Judge Rat is there, Malcolm has to chase him away with a poker in the first place.
Yes.
But this is his house. It was his house when he was a judge. It's his house now he's a rat. It's his house now he's a judge rat. This is where he lives. And this is an intruder that's sort of like coming in and taking over the place. It's an intruder that throws a shitload of books at him to try and move him. And again, we sort of like got the only time he moves or the only time he's injured is when he's hit with the Bible, yeah?
Yes.
Which I suppose is to suggest that there's some relationship between the rat being demonic. Is demonic fair? Or
I mean, judges swear on the Bible, don't they? That's the whole point of them. They are supposed to be ordained by God. That's what gives them the right to pass judgment on others.
So we're saying that. So yeah, that reading then would suggest that the rat is absolutely in the right. God has said that he should be killing this person.
Yeah, I think less post-colonial reading of it. I mean, you could read it from post-colonial idea from the missionaries, but I think more of a theologic reading of it. I think it has more symbolisms of that whole idea of tying religion to justice and the idea of only God can judge, and that's why judges are sworn in on the Bible, because they then become ordained by God in order to be able to pass his judgments, and that kind of goes right back.
That would make sense, because when he's sort of like leafing through the books, he's got sort of like Principica and all these other lofty scientific titles that have had no impact whatsoever on his situation, but the Bible has had an impact on his situation.
Yeah. Well, it also had a massive impact on the rat.
Yeah, not enough to stop the little bastard, though.
No. Yeah, I think you could definitely apply a couple of those kind of theories over the top of it. I think actually as well, to be perfectly honest with you, I think you could probably put queer theory on it as well, in that you can look at it maybe from that point of view of
you have the strangle wank.
Yeah, basically a strangle wank, oppressed homosexuality, with the rats being in the walls, having their party, but then the one that judges them comes along and they stop and they all hide. So therefore, you have those kind of oppressed sexuality going on there as well. So, there's a lot of different symbolisms that you could put into it if you wanted to. If you really, really, really wanted to go looking for things in it, you could definitely find them there.
Seriously, any short story in a shoehorn, and I think lit theorists can sort of like squeeze some fucking thing in there every time.
Even Marxism, you could do a Marxist reading of it as well, couldn't you? Really, because you can have the rats on the walls as really the suppressed, and it's who's in control of the production, and it, there's that power balance between the judge, which is kind of like the old one country tourism versus this new academic class coming in, which kind of symbolizes the new educated elite, and then that battle between the two of them for the right to hold judgment over others because of education versus the right of the land. So there's a lot of different ways you can look at it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think Malcolm makes a rod for his own back with the way the story starts, because the fact that he wants to go somewhere completely isolated and away from anybody that he knows is almost like the acts of somebody who is sufficiently depressed that they're going to top themselves. Excuse me. So he, for those who haven't read the story, he gets on a train and gets off at the first stop that he's got no idea of where it is, and then finds a house there that he doesn't know anything about. So he's sort of like gone there. And this is almost like the behavior of somebody who is severely depressed, isn't it? He's sort of like trying to run away from all of his problems.
Yes, and also does actually have things about sort of almost psychotic episode as well, doesn't it? This whole idea of just getting off at the first stop. Everything will be fine. Everything will be right. It's a manic depressive type thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and he doesn't want to take suggestions and help from friends, because chances are they will have been influenced by something that's around there. And it's just, you're taking this to a fucking extreme, dude.
Well, I mean, you get writers' retreats, but this is, like you say, it's a bit different. The whole idea of, I'm just going to get off a train and I'm going to find a house that somebody will let me stay in, and then he starts saying, I mean, you could actually argue that none of it happens. You could argue, because there's no other witnesses.
Yeah. I mean, one of the creepy things that I loved within it is the fact that the cord that holds the ridiculous bell on the top of the house is actually the rope that the hangman used to kill each of the judges. Is victims the right word? Victim seems like I'm being wrong.
Well, I mean, I suppose they would be basically everyone who he sentenced.
Yeah. So everybody he sentenced to death was hung on this rope.
Hanged. Come on.
Hanged. Yes. Sorry. Yes. Yeah.
Hung.
Yep.
Hung is for the punning. Hanged
Yes.
is for the people that were victims of the rope.
You're absolutely right. There's only one person who's hung in this conversation. So, yeah, hanged. What the fuck was I saying before we did knob gags again?
You were saying that how actually creepy it was that he had his hangman's
yeah,
effectively.
But whilst I think it's creepy, whilst I think, oh yeah, that's certainly a sign that this judge is not a particularly nice person. If I was going around an antique shop and saw a length of rope that was a hangman's rope and it was on a decent price, I would be thinking, do you know what? That would look pretty cool in my office.
Yes. It has that. There's enough of it as being, even though it's very macabre, it is that level that you would have, it's like having little torture devices in the house, not because you want to torture people necessarily, but it's more that they have that kind of macabre fascination about them. So, and especially as it was the rope that was used mainly for his judgments as well. I think, we've all taken a little trinket from work.
Yeah.
Maybe he got it for his retirement instead of a clock.
Yeah, one would like to think so. Yeah. But yeah, so on that level, I can almost relate to the judge, our nasty, villainous, antagonist within this story. I can relate to the fact that, do you know what? If I'd got a chance to have something like that in my house, I probably would. Yeah.
Yes. You know what?
I don't know anybody who would.
Because the way we think about these kind of things, I kind of think if we'd written it or if we were going to rewrite it, what would we do? And this one, I was thinking about what I would do if I rewrote it. I think I would have dead rats around the place that made you think that they'd been executed. So the judge rat, so Judge Rat himself is actually still passing judgment on the rats in his house because he's got to do it somewhere. He hasn't had a human for ages. So I kind of like. So Malcolm, at the early stages, before he sees Judge Rat, he kind of just finds a rat hanging in the laundry cupboard. And he almost convinces himself that it's a noose, but then has to convince himself that it's not a noose at all. Because how could that be possible? And one on a rat trap, maybe. But in such a way that it wouldn't have been nibbling at food. It looked like it was held down, like it'd be face up when it's been hit or something like that.
So first of all, he finds David Carradine rat in the airing cupboard and sort of like thinks, wonder what's gone on there. Then he comes across, unfortunate way of phrasing it, comes across Michael Hutchins' rat. I like this idea. Yeah. Oh my God, we need a grown-up here helping us, don't we? So we don't go to this level of.
We didn't realise how much we need a guest. Really, keeps us level.
Yeah, it stops us from really sinking into the depths of fucking depravity. I think if I was rewriting this one, aside from the wank rats, that's a perfect title, isn't it?
The wank rats.
Yeah. Aside from the wank rats,
that'll be a product online in about 10, 9, 8.
Yeah. Rats, yeah.
You've heard of Fleshlight?
Yeah. Yes, aside from those, I would want to do something to make that alarm on the top of the house more 21st century.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure what the hell I could do with that.
Would you modernise it? I mean, because you got to look at what happens at I think that the rope is very important. So I suppose in a way you'd have to make it a much older judge, like nobody in the area ever knew the judge was when he was alive or whatever. So it has to go back to a time when hanging was still a big thing. Or set it in America.
Nope, I'm going to set it. I'm going to set it in a church.
Oh, okay.
Because they've got a logical reason for a bell to be in there. Also, you've got the biggest judge of all, who's meant to be the house owner of that church.
Yeah. So you'd make it really, God, to go really, theologic with it.
Yeah, and if we're wanting to sex it up, in that case, we can put choir boys in there, because I know that priests fucking love them. Yeah.
Well, there was you're talking about the natural bell in a church, and you're talking about the choir boys and all that. And there was the time when a choir boy was caught with his knob through the bell rope, and the priest came in and told him off.
Genius. I like that. Yeah.
Sorry,
I like that.
We don't normally do jokes, but there we go.
But when we do, they're fucking belting like that one. Yeah. Yeah. I can't say anything after that, because that's just, that's, yeah.
That's like a Marvel movie in the middle of something incredibly tense. A joke has just taken everything away.
No, this is like, I was in class the other day, and somebody was telling me a story that they were working on, and they mentioned that one of the characters was pretending to be a horse when really he was a centaur, but he was sort of like wanting to keep it low key. So I said, "Oh, so he doesn't want to be the centaur of attention." Oh. And I thought, just go home now. Actually, nothing you say after that is going to be any better. Yeah. Throw money at me, and
very good.
Well, a week before that, I was explaining to somebody how good it is to have a character save a puppy, because it shows empathy you immediately have empathy for that character, because they've gone and saved a dog. So this one lad said, well, no, he said, what if I started a story about a fella who's got to stamp puppies to death because they're taking over a planet in a tribble-like way? And he said, the only way to actually save the planet is to get rid of them. I said, I suppose that might work. And he said, and I'm now about to put on my dog stumping boots. And I said, no, they're called hush puppies. And,
there you go. You leave the room at that point.
It was just, it was a case of, there's nothing else that I can say that's better than that today. I'm just going to go home. Yeah.
It is one of those big misnotes. I mean, I've done it. I've done it in one of my stories, and Rhys Searsmith of Inside Number 9 and League of Gentlemen fame. He did it in a short story and got huge amounts of complaints for killing a dog in a story. So it's one of those. Yeah, it's a.
Which one did he kill a dog in?
There's an anthology called. It was a comedy horror anthology that he was asked to write a story for. Hang on, let me find it. Anthology Rhys. Oh, hang on. Did that nearly do it then? No.
I know Agatha Harkness in WandaVision had killed a dog, and we were all meant to laugh about that because she sang about it in a funny song.
Yeah, but no, it doesn't really work that way, does it? Holy Car Maestro 6. No, I can't see it there. I can't. I'll find it and we will discuss it at another point. But it was I did a thing because I love those two. There's Rhys Searsmith and Steve Pemberton. They're my favorite script writers. Absolutely adore them. And during lockdown, they published the first 3 seasons of the scripts of Inside Number 9. And as the big geek boy that I am, I paid extra to go to a live online event where they were talking. So it was just an interview with those two. And they were talking, and Rhys Searsmith was talking about how he'd written this story and he killed the dog in it. And I think they did one in Inside Number 9 as well, because they didn't actually kill the dog in Inside Number 9, but it looked like they killed a dog in Inside Number 9, and the BBC phone lines lit up because they put a dog into he hides the dog in the umbrella stand, and
then jammed it down with you.
And even in League of Gentlemen, when the dog goes onto the fire as well, they got huge amounts of complaints over it. So killing dogs is a really fun thing to do if you want to get a reaction out of your audience.
Yeah, it's I mean, this is why we root for John Wick, isn't it? Yeah, somebody killed his dog, and
you know. I saw a wonderful meme the other day of when Thanos does his click, and then you got John Wick holding his puppy, and his puppy's disappearing, and it goes back to Thanos, and he just goes shit. So, anyway, we've gone off track slightly there because we're anthropomorphizing basically, aren't we? Because that's these animals are this judge rat is basically what that does. You get this idea. It has the eyes, it has the really sexy lips of the judge,
like a rat.
Yeah, so he sort of sits there alluring on the back of this chair. Yeah, it's really I loved it. I say it does have plenty of faults, some of which are due to its age, I think.
Yeah.
I think at the time it came out, I think even actually later than that, I think even if you're going through the 50s and 60s, and even if you read this in the 70s, then I think you would be looking, you wouldn't see half of those faults that are going on with it, because you were still quite exposed to that kind of language and those kind of things. I was saying to Heather the other day, we went to somewhere like Bygone Times, and I'm walking around this old, it's supposed to be an antiques fair, and I'm looking at stuff that was in my auntie's house when I was a kid. And I know that the stuff was like 1900, because it was secondhand to them. But now it's an extra 50 years on top of it. Now it's officially, antique. It's now Antiques Roadshow type stuff. So, we have got an extra 50 years on top of it being read in 1970. And when was it? It was 1890 something, wasn't it? That this one was published.
Just to make you feel really bad, I was marking some student work last week. And this student had put in an essay that she was looking at political discourse from the late 1900s. And I thought, shit, I was alive then. And late 1900s, way to feel fucking geriatric, Ashley.
In a way, but it really does show you do live through history a certain bit. I mean, it's like 1891 this story was published.
Yeah.
Right. So that 1991, it was 100 years old. So it's now another 30 years. So it's 130 years old. Is that right? Yeah.
Wow.
And so when you start taking it into that context, there's a lot of the stuff that you can forgive, because language was very, very different. And what we're going to be reading next week is even older than that. I mean, next week's one is pretty old.
Yes.
But yeah, I think as a conclusion on this one, I think I can see where he got his ideas from. You really can. That he would have seen one of these judges' houses, probably even in Ireland. It might have been an even bigger thing in Ireland when they, because the priests or the judge was a big, big thing. And, they used to have the house on the hill. I know in Blackpool, for example, St. Mary's School was a convent, and that's almost at the highest point in Blackpool. And before Blackpool was built up, it would have, lorded it over everything down towards the beach. And they used to do that. All the workhouses used to be built high for those kind of reasons. So you can see where a lot of those influences come from. Rats in the walls would have been much more commonplace in 1890s.
People like Judge Jeffreys, hanging judges who got reputations like that. There's suggestions that he'd taken some of his ideas from Sheridan Le Fanu's stories. And they're saying that this one is practically a retooling of Strange Disturbances in Angier Street and Mr. Justice Harbottle, which I'm not familiar with either of those stories, but I don't think any of us write something without being influenced by other writers and other stories anyway.
They go through Dracula with a fine-tooth comb to find every story that he's probably been influenced by. And I think you're right. I think, we all going to do influences on things. Like I say, the latest book that I'm writing at the moment is all I'm looking at the classic Gothic tales and rewriting them in a way and threading them together in a more modern way. The latest book that you're writing at the moment, you know, you're being it's not a new thing to write about serial killers, but it's how you do it and twist it and develop it and make it entertaining, and that's where it comes in. And I think with this one is, I think it has a, you know, it is an old story, but I think if you go back to the Victorian times, there's 100 stories of rats in the walls. That's why James Herbert used rats, you know, because they're frightening things. H.P. Lovecraft used rats because back in that day, you know, these things, you could open the toilet and find a rat. You know, when you went outside, it was much more prevalent than you get nowadays. You don't see them unless you go to London, where they're about the size of a house now because they've all been eating burgers. But the whole thing is that it's so different now compared to then that it does make it feel quite alien at times when you're reading these old stories. And I think this one falls a little bit into that because it kind of, you know, it does require you to have a certain amount of historical knowledge to get through this one. Unlike some of the others, unlike when we read Open Door, for example, you knew it was of its time, but you didn't need to have any knowledge of the time to make it really work. Not as much as this one. This one really does rely on, like I say, the term is schemata, and it relies on that very heavily, I think, in this one. There's a lot of stuff it doesn't explain because...
but yeah, that said, I still think it was built-in story. Really enjoyed it. I think Malcolm should have had a different name because Malcolm Malcolmson is just such a shit lazy. Do you know, in Catch 22, there's a character called Major, and when he gets taken into the military, he gets the rank of Major. So he's Major. And I think Joseph Heller says he was put in that rank by a computer that had the same sense of humour as his parents, which is a brilliant line. But
it makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much influence? Because I think when I was reading this story, there were little bits of it that are minute details. Where I think, oh, there's a bit in Young Frankenstein that actually references that picture at the end of Judge's house, right? And you think it's the tiniest little references, and there's a number of them. The rat on the chair, the way the rat sits on the chair and looks at him, I've seen that loads of times in films. You know, the way that they do it. I don't remember reading it many times, so I'm thinking that this story has got that influence through time to create these tiny little scenes that other people are picking up on, and they're using them in that way. I think even Ghostbusters 2 with the portrait of Vigon, I think, owes more to this. The way the portrait, we've always done this thing about portraits moving. This is something we've identified from the time.
Yeah.
The way this one does it, the way it just changes his expression. It's not there, then he's there, then he changes that expression. That feels more like what we see nowadays that get referenced when those type of things are happening in horrors and comedy horrors than it did with the other ones that we've read, like the Mezzotint and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So what's happening next week?
Next week, we have the most wonderful, violent Fen, that she probably is. Violet Fen, who is a Gothic horror expert. She's written a wonderful book about vampires in the media. And she'll be telling us all about that. But I said, what do you want to read? And she sent us a novel to read. You're gonna have to excuse me because I can't read the Castle of
Otranto.
Eh?
Otranto. Castle of Otranto.
Castle of Otranto. Thank you very much. I tell you, I'm the worst in the world at names, and when it's a name I can hardly pronounce, and I've got to put my own word in it, which is what was going on. Little tip for dyslexics, actually, when you're reading, and it was when I listened to it again, is when, oh, that's how you pronounce it. It does happen because you just make the word up so you can continue reading, and then you can go on. So yes, the Castle of Otranto, which is considered to be the first ever Gothic horror novel. That is the prototype that creates all the tropes that we now know and love and that we've been looking at and all that kind of stuff. So that is what we are going to read this week.
Yes.
A whole novel.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got my copy, not just the York Notes. I've got my copy, and I'm plodding through it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this one's going to be interesting because this one really dates back. I'm trying to remember. It's got a wonderful story about it, which we'll go into another thing, but I think it's like 1700s, this one. So this is pre-Frankenstein. This is the pre-lots, basically. So looking forward to this one and looking forward to chatting with Violet about it because she really is an expert. And as we found last week when talking to Ramsey, when you get to talk to someone who's an expert, and he's an expert on H.P. Lovecraft without a doubt, you find these other insights that you just didn't even realize were there until someone points them out to you, because you're just not expert enough to realize what's going on. So
I think one of the things I'm looking forward to is having a grown-up in the room who's sort of like going to stop us from doing knob gags. And,
no, to be perfectly honest with you, I know her, and I don't think she's going to be worse than us, to be perfectly honest with you, I think.
Yeah, good point. Absolutely good point. Yes.
So some quality, and also, it is kind of, being a bit more inclusive. So getting knob gags from a female presenter will actually,
Yeah, that will show that we're neither racists nor sexists. Yes.
See, we're not misogynists.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was another great
please,
one. That
hit the like, hit subscribe, hit the bell, hit somebody.
Send us messages. Send us messages so that you can get Monkey's Paw 2 Secondhand Wish.
Yes, please.
That's still there for free. There's still a couple of copies. I've sent copies of the Kindle book out for Blood Ink, and people just not downloading it. So therefore, those vouchers codes are still there. They've had them, but they're still there. So just apply for these things, and we'll see what we can do for you.
And suggest books. Yeah, suggest titles for short stories that we can look at as well. I just found out that it was Edith Nesbit who wrote the one about the man-sized marble or man-sizing marble.
Let's get that written down on a list next to some Agatha Christie, because it's not just horror that we talk about. We do need to sort of like state that we do like old stories, and there's an Agatha Christie novel which has just gone into public domain a couple of years ago that I would like us to do, which was her second novel. And don't ask me for the title of it because I'm rubbish with names, but you'll know it anyway when I do it. But it's just come into public domain, so I think we should cover that as well at some point. However, we are on the run up to Christmas, so we are going to give you forewarning that we've got this one next week, and it's either going to be the week after that or the week after. So in the next 2 weeks, we are going to be discussing The Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens.
Yep.
Because
was Charles Dickhead after we'd read The Signalman, because it was just or Dick Splash or Dick. Charles.
It needs to come back. We need to give him some glory to to come back to it. And there's nothing better in my mind to read at Christmas than The Christmas Carol. It's the one that started the tradition of Christmas stories and ghost stories at Christmas. So I think we're going to have Violet next week. Then I think either the week after that, to give people a run up. So I think it's a nice one to talk about before you get to that point, and then we can work out what we're going to do from there. So I think the next few weeks we're going to read A Christmas Carol. So that's a good one to look forward to.
Brilliant stuff, Colin. Thank you.
And
really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
awful lot of fun. So I'm now going to start wading through the Castle of Otranto. Yeah.
Yes, you start wading through that and get a patent on wank rats.
Wank rats, it's. I've already put it as a category on Pornhub. Yeah.
Right. See you later, dude.
See you later, mate. Take care. Bye.